Okay. So I deployed to Disaster Relief Operation DR 155, Northern California Gold Country Wildfire Relief. So, as during the introduction, I am John Decker. I am currently the Pacific Islands Region Logistics Lead, 2 years with Red Cross, as Maria said. And I deployed for about 25 days, August 14th through September 6th. Most of the time I was logistics chief, and then they got squirrely and maybe the assistant logistics or assistant director for logistics for 5 days. So I made it through without too many mistakes. So I want to give a little update on September 31st. This is the situation that DR 155 was in. There were 8 fires burning. 1.5 million acres had already been burned. About 1,500 homes were destroyed. 62,000 people were evacuated. Now, about 25,000 of those 62,000 were from North Lake Tahoe. Um, anyway, there was 12 evacuation shelters. One of those was a mega shelter, the Reno Sparks Convention Center. It involved 9 counties, 2 states, and the California Gold region equals the size of Florida, which would also be about the size of the 21st state in the United States. So it's a big area, and it was a challenge. So I threw some pictures in here just to show you what volunteers were up against. This was happening in many areas of the Gold Country where there was smoke all over, and we were masked up because of COVID, but more importantly, we're masked up because of the fires. Here's some damage in Greenville. I didn't get to see any of those fires or the damage because I was stuck in Sacramento at the headquarters for the whole time, but I'm hoping other logistics people will get to volunteer and get to see this beautiful country before it burns up. Here's logistics assets, just to show you guys the scope of the effort for the Gold Country region. All these black and white squares are logistics assets, trailers and things like that, where we had supplies moved around and staged because the fires kept changing directions. It's a big area. We were down here in Sacramento, which is right here in the bottom center. And all these red things are where the fires were. We had warehouses. Yeah, next slide. Here we go. Okay, so the challenges. COVID protocols were enforced. Everybody had to be masked up. We had to distance. The vehicle, oops, sorry, let me go back. The vehicles, normally a rental vehicle, you could put 4 people in a rental vehicle, but because of COVID, we were limited to only 2 people per vehicle. In trucks, our delivery trucks, we were only allowed to have the driver in a truck, so we always had to have another vehicle following to ensure safety and also to provide relief drivers and things of that nature. So it was very intense on transportation requirements. The fires were very unpredictable, depending on when the wind was coming up, what direction it was coming from, how hot it was. So we had to pre-position supplies all over the place. We had to identify potential shelter locations in very different places. Time and distance was a problem. Road closures were a problem. You'd start off driving with your GPS on your phone, and all of a sudden it would come up to a place where the road was closed and you had to find another route. So as logistics lead, I had oversight for 7 logistics activities: facilities, warehousing, transportation, in-kind donations, supply, life safety and asset protection. Most people know it as LSAP, and procurement. Now, if I had my druthers, I would rather be facilities or warehousing or LSAP, because those people got to drive all over that countryside and
The Wi-Fi is really the
can you go on mute? Let's see, who's that? All right, I was interrupted there. Sorry. Okay, so facilities, they identified 52 client and staff shelters, not all occupied at one time. I think the most we had at one time was 13 shelters. We had 3 warehouses, 2 staging areas. We had to develop facility use agreements for a lot of facilities that were opened without them. Did closing, opening and closing inspection. I had a team of 7 people that were doing that constantly. And we worked with our partners in the Red Cross in mass care, sheltering operations, LSAP, and warehousing to ensure that we had materials and facilities ready to go when needed. Okay, warehousing, as I said, we had 2 warehouses, one in Yuba City, California, and the other in Reno, Nevada. That's where we store products, we maintain an inventory, and our warehouse folks were also the guys delivering product to the shelters. Some of the shelters were a 6-hour drive away, one way. So we had to worry about safety issues for our personnel. We had to find hotels for them or shelter for them because we didn't want them driving back and Rick's falling asleep at the wheel or any of that madness. Transportation, as I said before, we only had 2 people per rental car, so we had a lot of rental cars. The transportation folks had to assign cars to individuals and make sure that when an individual turned the car over to somebody else that we found out who it was, and that was a lot of coordination with all the other activities within the Red Cross. We also provided couriers and airport shuttle services. In-kind donations, lots of water was needed, pallet after pallet of water, and most of it was donated by Budweiser Company. They made Budweiser beer cans into water cans, and they've been doing that for many years. And I guess the first try was a little less than to be desired on the taste of the water, but they have fixed their processing and the water tasted fine to me. And they were easy to carry around, didn't collapse like the plastic bottles. And we got a lot of snacks from a lot of different folks, a lot of companies willing to help out, trucks and forklifts and various other things. Supply. I was a supply officer for many years, and I can tell you supply is the hardest working group of folks, and they get the least recognition. They get requests for stuff, okay? And then they find where they can get that stuff. And then they make sure that stuff gets to who wants it and who needs it by the time they need it. So it's a lot of coordination. There's a lot of paperwork. We have a computer application, web application called Supply Procurement Tracker, which kept having problems. So challenges were overcome by the folks that I had working in supply, and kudos to them for all their hard work and making sure that they did what they could to get stuff to the folks that needed it. Life safety and asset protection. Most of these folks are prior law enforcement. They did a heck of a job going out to every single shelter, checking on safety factors. We had one shelter in Greenville, California that there were about 120 campers and tents outside of the shelter, and there were about 100 people inside the shelter. The folks outside the shelter were complaining about some drugs, alcohol, and things of that nature. So LSAP went up there and did an assessment, and we actually ended up hiring a security firm to provide 2 security guards full time in the evenings and all through the night to ensure the protection of our folks and our clients in the shelter and outside the shelter. Okay. Then procurement, when supply gets a requisition, they determine if we have it in the warehouse or if it has to be purchased. If it needs to be purchased, they send it over to the procurement folks and they find out where they can get it, whether it's from the regional warehouses or the national warehouses, or if we got to buy it from Walmart or Lowe's or wherever we can get it. They also look at possibly getting it from IKD sources, but procurement is a very tough job, and I was fortunate to have some really great folks working on that. Okay, and with that, I'll leave you with this nice, pretty chalk drawing that the Green Valley Church folks had presented to our American Red Cross folks that were working in the shelter. The Green Valley Church was one of the largest shelters we had in operation for a very long time. So that is the end of my presentation. Do I have any questions?
Maybe, John, can we wait for questions until after Elizabeth's presentation?
Sure.
Okay, that'll give folks time to type it in the chat box too, or just we'll let them ask it in person. But let's turn it over now to Elizabeth.
Great. Well, unlike John, I am not going to give you a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience on the DR. I would say my experience on this DR started on a fluke. I checked my email on a Sunday morning, which I very rarely do, but because I had sent a bunch of emails about training, I decided to check. And there in my email was an invitation or a request to come as a training supervisor. I had made myself available for 8 days. I had a commitment back on Oahu and I didn't have much time, so I really wasn't expecting to go anywhere. But I got the email and it said, are you willing to come for a week as a training supervisor? And I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. And John, can you stop sharing, please? Apparently somebody wants to see me talking. Anyways, this was a by name request, which is a little different than the normal deployment method. And so I had to say yes, and then it had to go through Maria and Deanna before I could get assigned. So the by name request is a little bit different process than the typical deployment. So when I said yes, they reached out to the region to get permission for me to deploy. And that takes a while because they need to connect and send emails back and forth and go back to the job director. Do we really want to bring somebody in for just 1 week? Because that's all the time I had. And while that was happening, I went online and I looked at flights to Sacramento because I also deployed to the Gold Country fires. And I looked for a daytime flight direct to Sacramento. I was chicken about going through other airports, so I didn't want a layover in another airport. And I wanted a daytime flight to avoid the red-eye fog that takes me a couple of days to get over. And so I found a flight on Hawaiian. And when I got assigned, I called Carson Wagonly and talked to them. And I said, okay, I found a Hawaiian Airlines flight. I gave them the flight number. Can I get this flight? And she said, oh, that looks great. But let me check if I can find a cheaper fare. So I ended up flying out on Southwest, which was about $100 less expensive. Even though I'm a diehard Hawaiian Airlines fan, the flight wasn't on my dime. Also, while I was in process of deploying, I went online to the exchange to figure out what in the world does a training supervisor do on a DR nowadays, because it's been a few years since I've deployed in training. And I found the toolkit and downloaded a bunch of the information there. As a trainer, I was expecting to teach shelter fundamentals and some of the other common courses. So I downloaded that information onto my laptop. I downloaded the instructor manual and the participant manual, the PowerPoint, so I would have them with me on arrival. I also, when I got the IAP and the sit rep, which I started getting, it was Sunday morning, I got the invitation. Sunday night, I got the first IAP. I downloaded that onto my laptop. And I started my new little notebook for the DR. I carry a 3x5 little notebook where I write all the notes. I wrote in the phone numbers. I carry that notebook everywhere, and I have the phone numbers for Maria and my daughters and my brother. And then I write down the 24-hour staffing number, the 24-hour transportation number, and the 24-hour lodging number. Because if my phone battery dies, I have an emergency of some kind, I need to be able to call. In my previous deployments, I have needed to call. So I make sure I have those numbers. And then I started packing. Well, actually, I had to finish laundry before I could start packing. You got to start a DR with clean clothes. It's one of the benefits of deploying off island. You start with clean clothes. When I have a disaster here in Hawaii, my clothes are already dirty. And finding time to catch up on my laundry is always a hard thing. So I did my laundry. When I packed, I did about half of my shirts Red Cross logo and about half of them plain clothes. I have deployed previously where we were not supposed to be branded, and I have deployed previously where we are supposed to be completely branded. And so I take about half on my shirts. I looked at the hardship codes for this DR. The hardship codes can be found on the exchange. And one of the hardship codes was staff lodging. It indicated that we had the probability or the possibility of staff shelters. So I packed my suitcase and my sleeping bag and my towel, and I took a big suitcase. Even though I was going for 1 week, I took a big suitcase. Marty took the same size suitcase, so I didn't feel so bad when we made room in the rent-a-car for him. I carried a big suitcase and I carried my backpack. My backpack, I packed my laptop and cords. I take an iPad and charger. I take a GPS and a charger. I packed my vest, made sure I had my ID, which hasn't since expired. I need to send Lily a photo of myself, but I don't have one. I took a folder with some of the printed documentation that I might need, such a blank calendar. And I packed a clean shirt and clean underwear and clean socks. If my luggage doesn't make it, and I've deployed when it hasn't, I want to be able to work tomorrow. So I've got my office supplies and whatever I'm going to need to start work. Then I emailed transportation because the IAP said, let us know when you're coming so we can make sure we can pick you up. And got back a message that says, hey, we're not planning that far ahead, so just let me know when you land. And when I landed, I had a text from transportation saying to meet up with another worker, and it happened to be Marty Moran, for which I was grateful since I know Marty, and he was the driver of the rent-a-car we were assigned. And then as I was waiting for my luggage to come off, I got a call from lodging saying, this is where you're staying. It took me several tries to hear that because, of course, in the airport, there's all those announcements. But anyways, I made sure Marty was staying at the same hotel as I was so that we weren't going in different directions. And they told me, bring your stuff into headquarters in the morning, check out of your room, bring your stuff to headquarters in the morning. And so I did that. That was fine. I was surprised that I had my own room. The COVID compendium says if there's enough lodging available, staff is in their own room. That was amazing to me. So not only did we have only 2 people per rent-a-car, 1 person per room on this DR. That isn't the case on all DRs right now, even with the COVID compendium. So Marty and I, we arrived within 15 minutes of each other. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. We went to the hotel, slept. In the morning, we got up. That hotel had lodging, breakfast. So we grabbed some food and Marty drove me into headquarters. Initially, he was going to keep my bag in his car. And I said, well, okay, you can have my bag in your car, but give me the key so you don't drive off with all my stuff. And so he pretty much quickly found out he was being sent up to Reno and I was staying in headquarters. I was deployed as a training supervisor. And if you've ever been in a Red Cross headquarters in a chapter building, there's not a lot of space. So I kapooed a little round table that had 1 chair that had an outlet so I could plug in my computer. And it was on the hallway between the front entrance and the bathrooms and the kitchen. So everybody was walking back and forth, which was good because I got to see some of the other Hawaii people who deployed. I got to meet Karen Kane. I saw Cheryl Jarrell. It was good. I have an ability to focus. Otherwise, that little work area was a disaster. They were still bringing in lunches, which was wonderful. I didn't have to go and find lunch every day. They brought them in. All the lunches were the same, so they handed you a lunch or you picked one up, and if you touched it, that was your lunch. There were snacks in the kitchen. Feeding was wrapping each apple in plastic so that we knew it was safe. There was a very strong emphasis on COVID protocols so that we all wore our masks. We were all doing everything we needed to do, cleaning work surfaces, social distancing where possible. A couple of people weren't able to social distance, and the most uncomfortable people were able to speak up and say, you know, I can't do this job in this way. And they got reassigned to other tasks that kept them more socially distant. In terms of my tasks, as I say, I was the training supervisor, so I was responsible for organizing an orientation, which hadn't been done on the DR, at least for a while. I found an old one later. I was tasked with connecting with the EBVs and getting them some condensed shelter training. I connected with LCVs needing training and assigned them their training in EDGE. And I organized some virtual classes. I also supervised a virtual trainer in Reno, who I hadn't worked with before, but Betsy did a great job. In terms of lodging, after the first night when they told me to move, bring my stuff, I was assigned to a hotel, and I was in that hotel for 3 or 4 nights. It turned out to be near where John was staying. And initially, the transportation person was driving us back and forth, one at a time. She couldn't take a carload of us to the hotel like usual. She had to come one at a time. So John saw me waiting and said, my hotel is near there. I'll give you a ride, which worked out beautifully. And over the next several days, he gave me a ride in the morning, and then in the evening when we left, we would often go out to dinner because he had been there long enough to find a couple of restaurants, and that worked out beautifully for me. After about 3 days, I got a call from lodging saying, do you feel safe in your hotel? We've been having complaints about a concern for safety. I said, well, it's loud, but I feel okay. Well, I was the only one staying at that hotel who did feel safe. And so they called me back a little later, said, please check out of your hotel in the morning and we'll move you to a different hotel. So even though I stayed in 3 different hotels in 7 or 8 nights, I knew where I was going to stay. And that really makes a difference on a DR. So lodging worked well for me on this DR. A couple of nights I drove a rent-a-car because transportation came to me and said, would you help us out? We've got extra rent-a-cars. We don't want to leave them in the parking lot here. Please take them to your hotel. I said, sure. So rent-a-cars have different charging than they used to. You used to be able to plug in like a USB. Well, one of the rent-a-cars I used didn't have a USB that my charger would fit. And so I really stressed out because my phone was low, my GPS was low, I didn't know where I was going. Okay, not good. So one of my recommendations when you deploy is make sure you charge your devices before you get in the car. Maybe get a new charger that fits the new device, the new kind of, I don't know what they call them, outlets. Anyway, it all worked out. I don't use my GPS here in Hawaii because I know where I'm going. So I don't have a lot of experience using my Apple Maps, but it worked. It worked. I found my way to the hotel and found some food on the way. When I got home, it's such a letdown when you get home from deployment after, 8 days full on 12-hour days. It's so exciting. It's so intense. It's so exhausting. And then I come home and it's like nothing, blah. So it's an adjustment. I've learned that the first week after I get home, I need to take things easy. Before I got to see my grandkids, my daughter insisted that I go and get a COVID test. I tested negative. That was a relief. Both of my daughters were horrified that I deployed in person during COVID. I mean, they get mad at me because I don't even have dinner with them. And here I am going off to California. So anyways, it worked out well. I had a good experience. I do recommend deploying. I do have a couple of pictures to share. I was a little embarrassed to find myself on the front of the IAP, the Incident Action Plan. There you can see me in the background teaching a course. They have high-tech stuff in Gold Country. Yeah. So this was during one of the condensed shelter trainings. The other thing I want to show you is how I update my availability for deployment. And so I come into Volunteer Connection and I click on my profile. And I come down to Disaster Cycle Services here on the bottom. And I look for disaster responder availability. And you can see I have no disaster availability on file. So I can click on that. And I can come in and I can put in some dates and whether I'm only available for the region or the state or the division or national or virtual. If you go with national, that includes region, state, and division. So region, you need a passport because our region includes Guam and Saipan. The state, you don't need a passport. Division, you don't need a passport except that our region includes it. That's how you update your availability. And you can ask to notify when it's expiring. Mine has expired. The other thing I wanted to point out was down at the very bottom, you can see what your gaps are, your group activity and position. And training is my tertiary gap. I was really surprised I got to go as a trainer, but I did, and it worked out well. So I'm going to stop sharing, and that concludes my presentation.